frugality. I want to talk a little bit about the word and some of its greatest fans. In some previous sessions, we've talked about the ancient Greek philosophers. One of their central ideas was basically frugality. So they demonstrated it in their everyday life. Socrates went around without sandals on. He wore very simple clothes. He went into the marketplace and he looked at all the olive oil that was on sale, and he said, who knew there were so many olive oils out there that I don't need? And he inspired even more extreme anti-consumerists like Diogenes the cynic. And do you remember the cynical philosophers were the dog-like philosophers, so called because they lived like dogs without anything. So the famous paintings of Diogenes, which is the theme of the theme of our talk this evening. Famous pictures painted throughout history of Diogenes in his barrel, which was actually a sort of upturned wine cask, which he lived in, perhaps quite briefly, and it was put in the shadow of the temple. And he lived in it as a sort of piece of conceptual art. I'm going to show you what it's like. I'm going to show you that I don't need anything. You know, all this stuff that you have, all this stuff, it's all vain fripperies, the stuff around the edge. He was inspired by Socrates, who, as I said, wandered around apparently with nothing. Although Socrates had a relatively conventional life. He was married, he had children. He just didn't earn much money. And this was actually a source of great annoyance to his wife, Xanthippe, who would throw sort of water on his head when he came in late from drinking and staying up late with his friends. He criticised this habit of his of not really putting bread on the table. So, but the Greek philosophers lived poor as a sort of demonstration, if you like, against the vanity of riches. Now, this idea has been around since at least minus 500 BC. Many philosophers throughout since that time have praised the value of thrift and frugality. And people still want to be rich. And it's perhaps, I like the idea that, you know, yes, I'd like to be frugal. I know happiness doesn't make you happy. I've been told that I know that riches don't make you happy. And I've been told that many, many, many times. But it'd be nice to test it out for myself, just to see whether what they're saying is true or not. Because I'm sure, you know, in my case, if I was rich, I would still carry on being happy. But we're constantly told this, you know, and it's a theme in most religions. It's certainly a theme in philosophy. The truly wise person doesn't need a lot of money to be happy. And in fact, Aristotle said the rich man is beset by worries. The kind of equivalents of the hedge fund guys of those days, you know, the merchants taking their corn from one side of the world to the other, were always worrying that their boat was going to sink and that they might lose their riches. So the Greek philosophers started this kind of like, you know, live frugally thing. It was also felt philosophically a good idea to be frugal or self-sufficient. And you see poverty talked about particularly by the Epicureans as well. So the Epicureans said, led by Epicurus, said, okay, you know, this kind of striving for stuff that you don't have is a source of great unhappiness. All the philosophers were saying, why are we unhappy? Why are we anxious? And one of the things they isolated, which is exactly the same today, is we're anxious because we compare ourselves with the Joneses. We want to show off, we want what they have, and we buy something more flashy, more expensive. It doesn't make us happy, and in fact, it just opens up a new vista of stuff, you know, out there. So however big your yacht is, someone else has a bigger yacht, so, you know, it's never going to make you happy. The Epicureans also said, we like being frugal, and the idea of being an of Epicurus was that you would sort of withdraw from the world and live in a commune with 20 or 30 friends, or philoi. Philoi is the Greek word for friends. And you wouldn't really be in a family, and you would reduce your expenses by sharing everything, growing your own vegetables, but that would give you a lot of time to be an artist and a philosopher. So the idea of reducing your expenses, if you want to be an idler or more idle, I think makes a lot of logical sense, because then you rely less on work. Why do we work? We work to make money. So if we don't need so much money, if we don't desire so much stuff, perhaps we won't need to work so much, and we'll have more freedom for our own creative enterprises. The Epicureans also said, this isn't about self-denial, it's about pleasure. I can take as much pleasure from a barley cake and a glass of water as from a great feast. I'm not going to say no to the great feast. If the great feast comes along, that's great. But I want to learn how to live on little so that I'm not scared of poverty. And I think that's a good thing too, a good sort of trick to get. So these are some of the background philosophies, if you like, for the idea of being frugal. I want to say, why am I talking about this and what credentials do I have as far as frugality goes. And just to say briefly, I was doing some research for this talk and I was looking up income levels, what's considered sort of poor and rich and so on. And I looked at the different percentages and I realised that I've been at practically every level at some point or another. So at certain points, our household income was like, I worked out in the bottom 6%. Of the country, for a year or two, not always. At other times, notably for 1 year anyway, in 2001, when I was doing really well, our income went up, and our household income went up into the top 10%. And most of the time it's been somewhere in the middle. Being in the bottom 6 or 10% is actually not fun at all, but at least it's horrible, because you can't do anything. You can't go to the pub, you worry about eating out, you're also sort of ungenerous. But what that was good for was teaching us a few skills in looking after our own money. And also, as a family, we lived 12 years in the countryside on a small holding, a long way from many shops. And my income was, again, fluctuating. Sometimes had a good year from books, sometimes a bad year. So we had to learn how to sort of live well on, not little, but sort of, medium amounts. We learned how to sort of bake bread. I tried to brew beer unsuccessfully. We grew vegetables, we had chickens and so on. I wrote a book about it, and of course people said, oh, well, it's all right for you living in the countryside. I live in a flat in London. Don't tell me to grow my own vegetables, So whatever you do, someone's going to kind of attack it. But we did at least learn how to sort of get hold of the finances. My own finances, I think, dropped to an absolute all-time low. I remember at Christmas driving to the petrol station in Barnstaple, and filling up the car and going to pay for it and being unable to pay for it because I'd gone over on all my cards and having to telephone my mother from the petrol station and ask her to pay the petrol station for this petrol. I thought, this is just getting ridiculous. So what I want to do this evening is to run through the sort of 10 areas of life that we could look at to save money. And I think being frugal, although I'm not saying I sort of enjoyed it particularly, but I enjoyed the lessons. And the lessons, I think, have stayed with me and with Victoria. And there's a sense in which you can actually enjoy being frugal. For example, just tiny examples. I mean, they seem ridiculous, but I enjoy cycling to the office and cycling here. And I enjoy adding up the little small sums that I'm saving by not going on the tube. And they add up to quite a lot, And I like, in Breaking Bad, who's seen Breaking Bad? In Breaking Bad, however much money he makes, there's a lovely little detail. He always makes his own sandwiches before going into the crystal meth factory for the day. So he's got this little sort of routine, and he's in control. And I start to enjoy that too, and taking our own coffee into the office and telling Percy, who works in the office, not to go out for lunch, but to bring his own sandwiches in. And this becomes sort of something that's actually quite fun. And if you can then then you have more money for the important stuff, and that's what I really want to talk about. You've got money for a tailor-made suit, which cost £800, which I bought when I was 40, and has been the best purchase ever. So you can buy very occasionally very good things, and buy, for example, good food. We get Riverford organic food delivered, and I mean, it is really good. It's not the cheapest, but it's not that expensive, and when you know what's coming, you can budget more easily, and you get the milk delivered, and it's absolutely terrific. Okay, so let's go through some of these ideas. And I have today a flip chart as an aid memoir, as well as a, what are these things called again? Clipboards. So I've got the clipboard and the flip chart to give you some authority. So And I've got some charts as well. So I've been doing some research in newspapers like The Guardian, Googling stuff, and I found out exactly where our money goes on average from government figures. I'd also like to say that this idea of being frugal is not about self-denial. It's about creating more time for idling, and it's about also reducing our emissions, carbon impact, or whatever you want to call it. Because doing stuff, driving a car, emits carbon, uses up power. I've got a list here of the 7 main kind of forms of activity which affect the planet. The first one is power. Okay, that's obvious. Electricity, our mobile phone use, and windmills or whatever it is. That's absolutely massive. That's 1405 emissions, whatever that means. Are you already handing out the notes? Yeah. Don't look at the notes yet. Turn them over. Notes are for looking at in halfway through. So don't glance at the notes yet, please. Everyone turn them over, because otherwise you won't concentrate on me. You'll wander through the notes and lose concentration. So I just want you to sort of think without looking at the notes. What do you think number 2 is? So we have power as the first. This is a list of the largest contributors to the increase in global carbon emissions from 2010 to 2018. Power usage went up in that time. Power usage goes up as people come out of poverty and use more stuff. Rich people obviously use a lot of power as well. And what do you think the number 2 was? The second largest contributor to the increase in global carbon emissions from 2010 to 2018.
Industrial farming, is it?
No.
Water.
Sorry?
Fashion.
No.
Food production.
No.
Water.
No.
War.
No. SUVs.
Whoa.
Big cars. So these big cars that you see people driving around in contributed, the next biggest contributor to the increase in global carbon emissions over the last 8 years or so, 8 or 9 years, which is amazing. They use so much power and energy to make them in the first place, to transport them, to run them, to maintain them. So they're incredible power things. So that's, I think, an amazing statistic. And in 99.9% of cases, they're utterly 100% totally pointless. And there's no reason to have these things. I mean, people say they feel safe in them. Maybe, you know, obviously if you're a farmer and you need to go off-road and stuff, there's a need for them, but not in Notting Hill. I mean, maybe it's quite nice for the car industry and people who work in it that these SUVs have been, Land Rover and so on, have been so successful. And they also, according to George Monbiot, kill more people than small cars. So there's 2 very good reasons not to have one of those. Other ones include heavy industry, trucks. Aviation is quite a lot less, about half of SUVs, and then shipping and so on. Okay, so, but I just want to make the point really that, you know, reducing energy consumption reduces your outgoings and reduces your overheads. So if you think of yourself like a business, you know, you've got these overheads, these regular payments that you have to make. You can go through them all. I mean, it's really boring, but you can go through them all and really make a lot of reductions. And with this method I'm going to show you, which is just demonstrating it, because we all have different ways of doing it. It's just a demonstration. But you could very easily save £12,000 a year with my little routines, which I'm going to show you and talk through. So our first outgoing is obviously housing. Rent and mortgage. And, well, that's really difficult. It's incredibly difficult to reduce that. We can all sort of think of ways of doing it, perhaps, at different points in our life. But also at other points, it's the biggest reality that you have to face. And it would be sort of a bit sort of patronising for me to mention anything connected to that, really, because we all have different circumstances. Obvious ideas are things like living on a narrowboat, which some of my friends do, which I wouldn't want to do. Living outside London, trying to get the mortgage paid off if you possibly can. There's a thing called the FIRE movement, Financial Independence, Retire Early, which goes through these different sorts of economies you can make, and finds that they can put in a certain amount per month into a savings account or against their mortgage and pay the mortgage off quite quickly. And this is actually quite commonly done in other countries. I mean, I remember going to Czech Republic, and the young people they buy a flat, but they really don't spend a lot of money. I'm talking about sort of middle classes, and then they try and pay off their mortgage really, really quickly when they're quite young. It's that opposite of what I did when I had money in my 20s, which was to spend all of it on cocktails and absinthe and other things. I got a reputation from my parents and my family being incredibly bad with money, which I was, because I'm more or less one of those people, if I've got 100 quid in my pocket, I'll spend it. If I've got a fiver, I'll spend it. And I'll sort of buy all the drinks. And so I really have to kind of rein that in, because that can get you into big trouble, particularly if you're a freelancer, as any freelancers know, because a good year is great. I'm like, yes, I've got loads of money, this is brilliant, like, you know, and I'm going to get a black cab. Who cares? I can afford it. But then the following year, you have a bad year, and you have no money, and you might be in debt. And you have to pay tax on the good year with the profits of the bad year that follows it. And that can really get you into a lot of trouble on any sort of a level. And by the way, you know, frugal living is good for rich people too. I mean, I've got some friends of ours, you know, he earns really well, but they're still frugal, and this has meant they've been able to sort of go from like smaller to bigger house because they do all the work themselves, and they work really, really hard on it. I'm far too lazy to do that sort of thing, but they've made money kind of by being frugal. Yes, another tip is to buy a house 25 years ago. That was a really good idea. It's awful, really, what's happening to the world. I talked to people in San Francisco. There was a girl from San Francisco on our retreat a couple of weeks ago. And people in San Francisco are having to live in smaller and smaller apartments. She's in a rent-controlled apartment, so she's basically safe. But that's not always safe, because they can sell it to another landlord. And the rents are going up and up and up. And all the interesting people, the artists, have now left. And the teachers can barely afford to live there either. And so the teachers are having to move out of the main city. And it's full of these very young, very stupid, very rich tech people who sort of get the bus into Google every day. And sort of think they're sort of young gods. So this is some of these ideas are not going to work in San Francisco because you just cannot afford anything. And people literally just have to move out or get something absolutely tiny, unless they bought a house 25 years ago, which is one of my tips. So can you save, you know, 100 quid, 200 quid, 300 quid, 400 quid, 500 quid a month? I don't know, but through some of these techniques, you probably can, and start to get the mortgage paid off. 2, car. Again, I've done the sums on cars, and your car is, after housing, your biggest outgoing by far. And it's extraordinary how much money goes out on a car. So even if you think you're not spending that much money on a car, I mean, we bought a crap car for £1,000, and something where we don't use it that much. But if you add up the parking tickets, which we get quite a lot of, speeding fines, trips to the garage, the insurance, particularly in London, you're talking about sort of £5,000, £6,000, £7,000, £8,000 or even more. This could be sort of actually cut out at one go just by selling the car. You then have £150 a week to spend on taxis and bicycles and trains. Bicycles, taxis and trains, or hire a car. You know, so when you do need a car, you can hire a car for like 30 quid a day. And just cut out that kind of grinding monthly expense. And it's something I'm trying to do at home. My family are still resisting it because they have one argument left, which is that we have a dog. And they say, well, it's good we can put the dog in the back and drive to Richmond Park on a Sunday. And I say, well, we did that twice last year. So you're saying each time we did that cost £2,500. I mean, you know, well, okay, that's not fair. We used the car at other times, but you know, just going to work out how much these journeys are actually costing. Ivan Illich in the 70s worked out that when you add up all the time spent on your car, not just in it, but working to fund it, and how many hours of the year you're working, and how many hours you're in it, and how many hours it's at the garage, and divide it by the miles, that you're driving. It seems like you're going at 70 miles an hour, but he worked out you're actually going at about 8 miles an hour or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but it's like slower than a bicycle. So we're all addicted to cars. We like getting in them, and they're sort of fun. But can you actually cut that expense out? Because that's a lot of money. What did I put? So that's $5,000. The point here as well is I'm saying that you can make these little frugalities, and then feel actually feel that you've got plenty of money. I think that's a nice word, plenty. I've got plenty of money. I'm not constantly wanting more. Yes, I want to keep earning well, but if I sort of bring the outgoings down, you can sort of get this sort of situation, and you start to feel like you've got some money in the bank, so that you're not worried if the boiler breaks and you can afford it. That's the absolute worst thing about dipping down below a certain level, is the feeling that yes, I can survive like this. It's fine. I mean, I drink plenty of beer from the supermarket or whatever. I couldn't really say I'm suffering in any way at all. But if something goes really badly wrong, then you might worry about it. For example, Victoria, this sounds like I'm attacking my wife, but I'm not. Victoria put petrol in the diesel car the other day. And this was because our cat had died. And she was all over the place. And we've had a horrible weekend. So our cat was put down on Saturday morning. And this cat has been with us for, 16, 17 years. So it's absolutely devastating. So we're all absolutely all over the place. And Victoria went down to the garage, filled up the car, and then got back and said, I put petrol in the diesel. This guy came around, called something like, super petrol guy in his van. And I said, well, our cat, he said, has your wife done this before? And I said, well, no, and our cat's just died. He said, that's always happening. When someone's cat dies, something bad's happened. That's when people put diesel in the petrol or petrol in the diesel car. Anyway, we had to pay 200 quid. But we had the 200 quid, and so I didn't sort of worry about it too much. I think a few years ago, some of our sort of poverty points, that would have been really stressful and the cause of a massive row. So, travel in general. Okay. Putting aside the car, because I'm talking about commuting, we cycle to the office. It's 20 minutes each way. I'm just talking about my experience. I know lots of people will say, well, I can't do that. And obviously, not everyone can do all these things. I'm just running through some of the things that we've done as an example. And I think cycling is just such a huge pleasure. And it's completely free. And I just really, really enjoy it. And it costs nothing apart from the bike repairs. I could save at least £15 a week cycling to the office with a bicycle. That's just me. And so times 2 for 2 people in a household is £14.40 over a year, which is quite a lot of money just for cycling and not getting the tube. Food and drink. Okay, so this section is called Bring Your Own Sandwiches. And I'm fully aware that these are all sort of just the kind of things that our parents taught us, and sort of rightly. But in my case, being somebody who sort of tends towards luxurious living and splashing it out, I have to make a bit of an effort to do these things. But I'm really pleased with myself when I make the sandwiches. So Bring Your Own Sandwiches is a key concept in this whole thing. Your own sandwiches are much nicer than the ones that they sell in Tesco. And okay, it's only £3 for my meal deal, but actually the cost of 2 slices of bread, a piece of cheese, and a bit of pickle must be sort of far less than that. So again, we're saving fortunes on bringing our own sandwiches. Coffees, Starbucks, that's out as well. So they're incredibly expensive, and I'm going to go to Starbucks and I'm going to get my treat. It costs £2.50. Think about if you buy 2 coffees a day, times 5, that's £10, is it? Am I right? No, £10 a day. That's 50 quid a week. That's $2.5 grand a year, which is another holiday, or it's like 2 Savile Row suits, that you spent on coffee. It's the most gorgeous pair. No, I mean, how many pairs of shoes? It's 10 pairs of Church's brogues, that you just sort of wasted on coffee. So I have a coffee. Well, I have a coffee before I go to the office, and then in the office we have a little sort of coffee plunger thing, if required, which I never use. I've also said avoid supermarkets and choose Riverford or something like that. So when I don't do this so much now, but when we lived in the farmhouse, we were such a long way from anywhere that we had to kind of work out different ways of shopping, and getting vegetables delivered, not the ones that I hadn't made for myself, of course, and going to Lidl and avoiding the big Tesco's and Sainsbury's was a good economy. Because obviously, as soon as you walk into a Tesco's or Sainsbury's, oh, well, I need that, and you overspend, and it's difficult to come out without putting 100 quid into your basket, because you think, well, I'm here, I'll get all this stuff. But that's actually the opposite of what you should be doing, which is budgeting, planning, and thinking ahead. I might also say, I'm now getting so annoying about this that I'm starting to do spreadsheets at home. So it's quite a good idea to not only to learn how to do spreadsheets, but to find spreadsheets quite enjoyable. And I send little emails to Victoria, kind of working out what incredible savings we're making on various things, and how this will mean that we can, go to Italy or something. Whatever it is that you want to do, it becomes easier.
This divorce is going to cost you.
She's into it as well. Clothing, again. I think the principle is, buy the good stuff. Sorry. I have to say, if you don't have a proper job, then you do save an awful lot of money, because you don't need all this stuff. You don't need the clothes and the copies and the snacks and the treats and the sort of drinks after work and so on. So if anyone's kind of contemplating quitting the full-time job and becoming a freelancer, yes, it can be very tough because your income's going up and down, as I said, but you are also saving a lot of money, so your outgoings are going down. So what can we save here? Food and drink. I put 1840. I can't remember how I worked that out. That's like 20 quid on coffees, 20 quid on something else. Obviously, these are rough figures. I'm just trying to give you the principle. As far as clothing goes, I think you can sort of, as you get older, you don't want to be dressed in rags, but there are ways of dressing reasonably well without spending loads of money. If you've got a bit of time, going to second-hand shops, vintage shops, going to places like Record and Tape Exchange in Notting Hill, where I sort of pop in and get a shirt or something. And one very good pair of shoes, a couple of pairs of trainers, that's all you really need. I just put a random sum here of 500 quid. One thing that I think not economise on, what I say to Victoria, she said, well, I'm spending so much on my hair. And I said, that's actually fine. Spend as much as you want on your hair, because that's a kind of a therapy. What else have we got? Oh yeah, so fuel. Sorry, this is a bit sort of headmasterly and kind of basically dull lecture about frugality. Right, I can hardly bear to say this because it's so boring, but there's money-saving supermarket websites or whatever they're called and things like that. And a friend of mine said, oh, have you thought about switching your energy supplier? And I was like, I'm not going to fall for this rubbish. And eventually I did. I changed it to another energy supplier. And ever since then, I've been really on the case, like reading the meter, monitoring my monthly outgoings, and cutting it down a little bit. And just the process of doing that makes you think a little bit more about turning lights off. So our monthly electricity and gas bill used to be something like £240, and now it's about £140. And it seems to be going down all the time. I'm not really quite sure why. Other than I've got this sort of enlarged consciousness of what we're doing, because I keep looking at the bills and keep checking them. And you have to be careful that they're not overcharging you. There's a story in the paper that they put you on a monthly direct debit, and they make you pay a little bit more than what you actually use because they want you to stay in credit. And this can build up to quite a lot of money, the credit they have for you. And then sometimes these companies go bust because of our sort of vicious neoliberal capitalistic world. There are loads of competing energy companies which then go bust. And it can be quite difficult to get that money back. And there's some guy who's involved in a case where he's trying to get his 1,500 quid back as we speak. But if you could sort of keep checking it online, even 10 quid a month is actually quite a lot of money. You know, I sort of think, actually, £10 that's a lot of money. I could buy a lot of beer for £10. I could buy, like, practically a case of beer. So fuel and power. Things that use a lot of power is, again, fairly obvious, things with motors. So dishwashers and washing machines and tumble dryers. Now, of those, we use the dishwasher quite a lot and we use the washing machine quite a lot, but we don't use the tumble dryer much anymore. In fact, we put the tumble dryer a long way away in the cellar at the end of the cellar, so it's difficult to get to. And we try and use wind and sun power in the little yard to dry our laundry. When you go to Italian towns, everyone's drying their laundry outside, outdoors. It rains, Tom, in this country. Not always, and you can sometimes bring it back in and put it in the kitchen. And it's actually incredibly amazing how quickly laundry dries in the sun and the wind. And it dries in a much nicer way than the tumble dryer, which leaves the clothes all sort of wrinkly. It's usually because you're working too hard and you've run out of time and you're not thinking ahead. But I think this lack of tumble dryer use and that, what are they called? The drum going round and round and round for like hours and hours on end, using up so much electricity. I think that might be the secret of our diminishing fuel bills each month. And, of course, power is the greatest contributor to global warming. So less dishwashers, less washing machines, anything with a motor that turns has got to be good for your wallet and the environment. We've even removed some of the radiators downstairs as well, because again, they sort of pump away when you're not there. You leave the timer on. And do we really need these radiators on, or can we put an extra jumper on? Things to think about. So I put, so our bill's gone from 240 to 140, and it's still going down. I make that 1,200 quid in a year. I've got one here about your loans and credit cards. Obviously, there's no point saving money until you paid off all your loans. The first thing to get rid of, again, it's an obvious thing to say, is the credit card, because the interest rates are absolutely ridiculous. So I think now we've got rid of all our credit cards. I haven't actually had a credit card for years because I forget to pay it off. And I sort of, when it says £5,000 available, I sort of think that's free money and just go and immediately spend it without realising they've got to pay it back over the next 10 years and really suffer at terrible rates of interest, like 20 or 30% interest a year. So it's good to obviously get all those loans paid off. And if you do want to borrow money, it's much better to get a sort of 5-year loan from the bank, much cheaper than taking money out on a credit card. And gradually try and get all those loans paid off. And this did happen to us when we lived on the small holding. And other people on the small holding said they turned into debt-free killers, they called themselves, DFKs, because they no longer had any debt, but they were killing animals and slugs and things all day long. That was a little small holding joke, DFKs. But that's obviously a good feeling. I mean, Victoria says, debt makes me feel sick. Debt makes me feel sick. And when we, in my own case, when we closed our shop, we still had some debts hanging around from having run a bookshop for 5 years. And it's just such a sort of horrible feeling. You feel like you can't really sort of move forward. Unless you're a massive business person, in which case you love enormous debt. I was reading about Soho House, and they have a debt of £250 million. They think that's great, and they keep borrowing more and more money. So I don't really understand that, but that's a whole different kind of world out there. And that's perhaps not his own personal debt. when you read in the financial papers about the debt that some of these companies have, it's absolutely extraordinary. But that's something else. Like, you know, if you owe someone £1 million, it's an asset to them. They're really happy. The bank is absolutely thrilled. If you owe the bank £100, the bank is not thrilled, and they might come knocking to get your money back. It's a weird rule. But in our case, let's keep the debts down to a minimum, get rid of them. And I have said this before, and it is something I do, is just check your direct debits, because I don't know what the figures are, but it's something huge, the uncancelled services that you still pay for. Even if you pay for them for sort of 2 or 3 months, add up to sort of millions or billions when you add everyone's up. So look at the direct debits, which is much easier now on your bank account, so you can see what's actually going out. And just try and cancel some of them. Don't cancel the one to the idler. It's only £27 a month in the first year. Phone. Now, phone, I, personally speaking, got rid of the dumb phone. I got rid of the smartphone, and I was sent this dumb phone by the company that makes them for review in the idler, but you can get a dumb phone for like £10. And we signed up to something. I looked at something called Smarty. So I did this thing which is quite painful, of looking at the other mobile phone providers. And there was a new one called Smarty, which said it was only £5 a month. So Victoria rang up all the other mobile phone companies that we had in the household, and just went through them all, and got our monthly fee reduced to about £6 a month each for the children each, and me and Victoria, which is really good. It's like £1 a week. So that saves absolutely masses. And I don't have a smartphone, so I don't need all the data or anything like that. What I have instead is I bought a mini iPad for something like 200 quid. So there's a mini iPad and a dumb phone. And I think that's good. And I've also personally, this week, pretty much got off Twitter completely. I think Twitter, as you know, Twitter and Facebook are advertising sales systems. That's what they're there for. So if you're on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and stuff on your phone, you're paying a lot of money to be advertised at. That's the way I see it. So if you have a dumb phone, you don't get the ads, and you're less likely to spend so much money. So that's another saving. So you're not only saving the actual cash that you're spending. I mean, I remember a few years ago when I had a smartphone, I was spending 30, 40, £50 a month on this thing. Why? I just didn't really need it. £50 a month, what's that times 12? 100 times 6, £600. I mean, it's an awful lot of money. Yeah, 7, credit cards and loans. I've just put a figure of £1,000. Phone, I put 282. I don't remember how I worked all these things out now. Entertainment, cinema, eating out, theatre, pub. Well, they're very expensive, actually. I mean, even the pub's expensive nowadays. Going to the cinema costs about 15 or 20 quid in these big multiplexes. I know it sounds a bit miserable, but can you go to the cinema a bit less? And do we have to eat out so much? Some people, well, again, this is a fairly obvious one. I've been talking about cleaning to the writer Jeff Dyer, and he says, I don't understand why everybody doesn't do their own cleaning. I just love cleaning. And because I hate cooking, but I love cleaning. For him, it's a great sort of distraction from his work. And he really enjoys it. He likes the different cleaning products you can get, the whiffles and things like this. And we had a lovely conversation, which is going to be coming out on a podcast, about how much he likes cleaning. And so by doing all his own cleaning, obviously you don't have to pay for a cleaner. Now, it's a very difficult subject. Some people have cleaners, some don't. Is it good to be giving people that sort of employment? Is it not? But I think if there's 2 or 3 of you, I don't really see why anyone would really need a cleaner, because if you've got a household, then everyone can help with the cleaning. And our children should be forced to be helping. I mean, I've been through sort of more kind of like semi-wealthy middle-class phases, and we've had cleaners at home. When our children were really small, when we had like 3 under 5s, and we were really, really kind of stretched, and perhaps that was better. But even then, I think it might have been wiser for us to do it ourselves. But certainly as the children grow older, and you have more time as well, if everyone did an hour a week, you know, in a family of 5, that's quite a lot of cleaning. So that's an obvious way to save money. I've also looked at, no, that's it. Yeah, so I added it all up to about £12,000 in a year, and that's cash. And you think, well, that's money that I would have to earn and pay tax on. You know, I'd probably have to earn sort of £20,000 to get that sort of cash into the bank. But more than that, it's a principle and I think an attitude. I'm really aware that I don't want to sort of sound preachy or like this is some kind of like sermon, but I just think it's nice to get the conversation out there, and it's actually fun to think about money. You know, when I was in my 20s, I don't think about money, and I didn't think about money, and then money came and sort of, I realised that I'd been overspending, and money came and sort of bit me on the arse sort of thing. So I actually find it sort of quite enjoyable to kind of sit down and work out these frugalities as a kind of a hobby. Now, I just want to finish by talking about a breakdown of average total household expenditure. And this is figures from the state, which I'm going to hand around, which are on your notes. We'll just run through these because I think they're really illuminating, actually. The first one is transport. And we spend 14% of our annual income on transport, moving around, going places, getting in the car, getting on the bus, you know. Well, that's a massive amount of money and could easily be saved simply by not travelling, i.e. staying at home. Now you might say, well, I have to travel for my job and so on, but you know, could some of that be, could you do some of that journey on a bicycle or somehow cut down your travelling? I just thought that was absolutely huge. So it's the biggest expenditure of any household is transport. Number 2 is housing including fuel and power. So number 2 is housing including fuel and power. Again, that's about 14%, an average of £70, £72.50 per week in the UK. Is there anything we can do to reduce that? I talked about sort of fuel and power. Again, doing less means your bills go down, and in theory, you should have more time for sitting around playing the ukulele or reading a book. The third one is recreation and culture, and that's things like eating out and going to the cinema. So people spend on average nearly £70 a week on that. Well, maybe it's a bit miserable, but you could quite easily cut that out for a few weeks, saving 70 quid, according to this thing. The next one down is food and non-alcoholic drinks. That's difficult to cut back, I would say. This is on 56.80, which sounds like quite a low sum for a family to be spending on food and non-alcoholic drinks in a week. Restaurants and hotels is the next one down. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th, which is quite surprisingly high. So I was quite surprised about that. So you could cut down on your restaurants and hotels. Miscellaneous goods and services is the next one down, which is not a very helpful category. I don't really know what it means. The next one is household goods and services. So that might be string, Mr. Muscle, whatever, you know, cleaning products. Actually, even cleaning products, most of them is a complete waste of money because you only need a lemon and some vinegar. Everyone knows Mr. Muscle's like a massive sort of con. It's some sort of bleach marketed really well with some clever ads. Clothing and footwear is the next. And then communication, which has gone up a lot on £15 a week. And that's your mobile phone and your internet and so on. The next one down, I was absolutely amazed by how little this one is. Alcoholic drinks, tobacco and narcotics. I mean, alcoholic drinks is definitely one of my biggest outgoings each week. And that's one thing I've always refused to cut back on. because I think low quality booze is really bad for you. And it really, spending a little bit extra on really sort of fine ales and proper wines makes all the difference. So that's where I'd like to save, put any savings I make, is on buying Victoria would buy like a really good bottle of wine to have at home, and that's a real pleasure, and that costs 20 quid. But you could save 20 quid on the coffees. So this is what I'm trying to say. It's like live like a king on less money. Health and education. Well, the last one is education. I thought that was interesting. We don't spend anything on education, really. And personally, I think we should spend more on education. I think education is one of the most beautiful gifts you can give yourself. With the money that we save on these various economies, I give my daughter and myself a tennis lesson each week. And that is just pure bliss. And I just feel like I'm the sort of richest person in the world, having an actual tennis lesson with one person teaching the two of us when we can. And I think teaching piano lessons and literature lessons or whatever it might be for yourself and your children is money really, really well spent. And so I was amazed at this, is that people spend all their money on driving around and going on trains and absolutely nothing on education. It should be the other way around. And it's not that hard to do. It's, even when we were in Devon, we had a piano teacher who came around on Saturday morning and taught 4 of us, and we had a half-an-hour piano lesson. That was the highlight of my week. I thought that was absolutely amazing. So I think education we should probably spend more on and cut down on some of the other things. So that's the end of this part. Let's have a quick drink, and then we can look through the notes and have a brief chat about these rather sort of boring frugalities. Thank you.